we really want to dig a little bit more in what it means to have, let's say, a multi-stakeholder approach that is also envisaging stakeholders that we have not thought maybe at the very beginning. So how, for example, the donors community can play a fundamental role in supporting achieving cyberpeace. And for doing that, I'm very glad that I have the chance to share it with you and also with our esteemed speakers some of their experience and their expertise in how collaboration and also sort of like more participatory approach, and we would really like to stress this aspect also in terms of like concrete experiences that they have in how philanthropies and how civil society organizations working with philanthropies can really kind of like complete the pictures that we've trying to share with you until now in terms of like which are the different actors making their role in terms of achieving cyberpeace. So for all our viewers also, we would we would really like to receive your questions and your contributions via Slido. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to thank my fellow panelists. Very welcome to Alberto Cerda Silva, International Program Director on Technology and Society from Ford Foundation, and Laura Somoggi, Program Director at the Womanity Foundation. I would like to invite the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and also to share with us some sort of like initial thought on which is the role that philanthropy can play today and also tomorrow in the future in terms of supporting the achievement of cyberpeace, in terms of like really ensuring that the security, dignity, and equity that we've been going through the discussion up to now. Alberto, can you hear me? The floor is yours.
I can hear you. I wonder if you can hear me.
Very well. Yeah.
Wonderful. We were having some technical problems at the beginning. Thank you very much for the invitation, for being part of this conversation. And let me introduce myself and the work that I do at Ford Foundation. I'm not the director. I'm a program officer within Ford Foundation at the Technology and Society program. As probably you know, Ford Foundation is a social justice philanthropy. Also, we primarily focus on ensuring that we reduce inequality around the world, particularly regarding to those communities that are usually marginalized and excluded from public deliberation and debates. It's a very comprehensive philanthropic entity. We have several programs operating in the US, as well as in other 10 different regional offices that we have around the world. The Technology and Society program in particular works on supporting the public policy, the engagement on public digital policies with a human rights and a social justice perspective. This is primarily a work about, not that much about the use of the technology itself, but primarily about setting the rules, then the legal rules, as well as the technical standards and even the business practices that can ensure that we have an internet that is open, safe, and affordable. So as an internet that ultimately allows for an alignment with human rights, but also enables to foster equality, to reduce inequality, to advance social justice. Most of our work so far has focused on building and amplifying the work of organizations based in the countries where Ford Foundation operates. In coming years, we are looking into having a much more international framework. Today, we have a significant level of engagement with organizations working across Latin America, Africa, as well as Europe. So with that, I think I provide a short introduction of the work. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Alberto. I already have some questions, but I will try to restrain myself 1 second to leave the floor to Laura to jump in here to give some initial remarks, and then maybe we can start the discussion. Thanks.
Hi, hi Francesca, hi Alberto, and hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So, as Francesca said, I work for the Womanity Foundation. We are a Swiss private foundation based in Geneva. I'm not in Geneva, I'm based in London, but it's an organization that headquartered is in Geneva. We are an organization that works on advancing women's rights in the Global South. And we have programs on prevention of violence against women and girls, which is the one I lead. But we also have programs on education of girls, women economics empowerment, and use of media to challenge gender stereotypes. So we don't have any program which is or area focusing directly on the cyberspace of technology. But it was interesting when I was invited to join the panel, I decided, okay, I need to take this Cyberpeace lens to our portfolio and see what do we do that is related to that. And I found out that we do a lot related to that, even if it was not kind of the starting point of the work. So we have work in Afghanistan, in India, in Brazil, in Lebanon, and the MENA region in general. And I think bringing my women's rights perspective to the conversation and how donors such as Humanity Foundation has been working in that space, I think a lot of the work we do is related from, if I look at the spectrum, is from educating girls in Afghanistan on coding to help women shaping the cyberspace, to having programs in India and Brazil where we support women-led social enterprises that are using technology to provide access to information, safe spaces, and access to justice via technology, or programs that are specifically focusing on fighting online gender-based violence. So and I can talk more about any of those programs in more details. But I think for me, one of the things that when thinking about the role of philanthropy, I think, and I will talk more about it later, is not only on the what we do, on the type of programs we support and what areas of work, but also on the how we give the support, how we work with organizations in the Global South. So I think there's a lot on the what and on the how that can help advance equity, fairness, and justice in the cyberspace. So I think I'm going to stop there, and we can talk a little bit more in a minute when you'll be sharing more details about the work we do.
Thank you so much, Laura. And actually, in both your intervention, I think you raised a pretty important point, which is also one of the aim of the Cyberpeace Institute, which is the global dimension. When we started working on the global dimension, we also have to recognize that global is made of people, of human beings. And human beings are clearly very much relating to their local context. And thanks to your experience, maybe you can give us a couple of examples, both Laura and Alberto, in terms of like which is the relevance and how we can really grasp the local context. If you can give us like 2 suggestions in terms of how we can really work with vulnerable communities in the local dimension to really have a sort of like narrow down the approach in order to be able then to scale and also to globalize the lessons learned. Laura, maybe we can start with you and we move to Alberto. Thanks.
I think a question is relevant for the work we are doing in this space, but I think for the work that philanthropy is doing in general, which is really understanding the local context. I think there's been happening a lot of reflection and self-critique of the philanthropic sector on how to rethink about it, which is considered a colonizing approach of philanthropy in having global north organizations, not only funding, but also kind of shaping the work being done in the global south. And really devolving power, because I think it's important to reflect that how we need to stop perpetuating a way of working that created a lot of the problems we're trying to solve. So I think this is in a more like a kind of a mindset perspective. Is very relevant for this conversation, but I think for the role of philanthropy in general. And the way we do at Humanity is really working with organizations and enabling them to give the input of what is happening there what are the issues, what are the local stakeholders, what the communities need, and they shape the interventions. It's not about us telling, okay, this is our program, we just need to find an implementer in Mexico. So to give you the example, in Mexico, we worked with, we supported an adaptation of a global program to Mexico, a program from an organization called Association for Progressive Communications from South Africa. And they have a global program called Take Back the Tech, which is about really improving women's access to technology and safe cyberspaces. And they work with a collective of feminists in Mexico, led by a group called Luchadoras. And before they even started thinking what they were going to do in Mexico, they did a series of workshops with techies, activists, women from different parts of the country to understand how they face the problem, what kind of support they felt they needed. So really getting from the community that were going to be impacted by the program, what they really needed. And using that information, they shaped initiatives. So, and they had from storytelling workshops to help women to find their voice in the digital space, to really giving, like they did an animation series for young women about non-consensual sharing of information online, what young women could do. And then they did a whole online initiative and with offline workshops to discuss that. So also, again, bringing the nexus between the online and offline, which I think sometimes is a very artificial divide, because what happens online affects people offline and vice versa. So I'll stop here. I think the example from Mexico, for me, it's quite strong, because everything that they decided to do in Mexico was based on conversations with the women on the ground. And interestingly, a lot of the things they did in Mexico, in the end, was used by APC to share with other countries. So we had the global to local, the local to global knowledge sharing, which I think is very critical if you want to do things that are relevant for marginalized women and women in different countries as well.
I swear, the participants, we haven't prepared this, but thank you so much for the example, because it's exactly what I was looking for. Because you raised, I mean, you were highlighting two very important points, which is the local to global, and then actually the kind of like how from the global we can use it back in the local context, thanks to lessons learned from a successful example. But what it makes the example successful to me is the feeding from the local community, but also, as you very well said, the focusing on the real needs of the human being as a whole and the importance of online and offline. So Alberto, now we raise the bar. I tell you, so you have to give a good example as well.
Sure, I will try. It's hard to compete with Luchadoras and APC, I have to say. Anything. I think that the critical issue for us is to be sure that the initiatives answer local priorities. In the digital rights movement, in the disability rights movement in the US, people usually say nothing about us without us. And that is the approach that we want to see. We want to see not only that we work on the concerns that people from Global South countries, but we work with them in shaping those concerns and determining how to move forward in dealing with those concerns. And this is critical, especially for an institution like the Institute, even in as specific issues as Cyberpeace and the protection of civilian infrastructure worldwide. Let me give you a good example. In Eastern Africa, 2 or 3 years ago, we were supporting a number of initiatives, including CIVIT at the University of Strasbourg, Article 18 in Kenya, that were dealing with internet shutdowns. Because the critical problem for social justice organizations there was the fact that governments were shutting down the whole internet, not only in a given region or for a given user, but at times for whole users, for whole countries. And that was a problem. Now, if you take that problem and you go to Latin America, you may find nothing to do, because internet shutdown is not the problem in Latin America. The local relevant problem in Latin America for most of our partners has been gender online violence and surveillance. So And that's the case, for instance, in the case of Mexico. As you probably recall, in 2018, when Mexican civil society, in partnership with the Citizen Lab, disclosed the fact that the federal government was surveilling practically the whole social movement, from human rights activists to public health activists, not to talk about journalists and social leaders. So those we supported that engagement precisely because we saw the relevance to preserve the digital space as a space for social action. And I believe that the Institute have the advantage of, as a one-year-old organization, have the advantage of brilliant expertise of other initiatives that have a global footprint. And here I'm thinking particularly initiatives like Association for Progressive Communication or the IFEX IFEX, which is a coalition of freedom of expression organizations, 160 of them working worldwide, or Privacy International, which has a network of over 25 different organizations working in 20 countries. What is relevant about these three organizations is they recognize and acknowledge the identity of their peers worldwide. It doesn't matter if they are working in Mexico, in South Africa, or in Thailand. They work with their local priorities. They are not branding their work as their own. They are providing capacities to those organizations or amplifying their capacities. At times, it is about getting coverage in mainstream Western media. At times, it's about supporting the development of strategic thinking for litigation and their local context. And they are trying to fulfill a niche that local organizations cannot deal with directly. For instance, all these partners, we also work with APC, IFEX, and Privacy International, have been supporting the engagement of local civil society from TEDIC in Paraguay to CIPESA in Uganda to be effective in advancing human rights recognition through the use of the UPR system at the United Nations, or through the engagement before the rapporteurs on freedom of expression at the OAS, at the African Union, or at the United Nations. So we have a number of opportunities where EU can play a significant role advancing the purpose of cyber peace worldwide, but be sure that you are dealing with the actual needs of the peoples in Global South countries, and you are including them in the whole process from the very design of your strategy.
Thank you so much, Alberto, because I mean, the last point that you mentioned, so I would say inclusive by design and by default, which is definitely something that we are trying to do, and we would definitely, let's say, try to follow. But also for mentioning the collaborative approach in terms of like recognizing the expertise and the experience that is already out there in terms of like our partners, our network, but also all the people that are interested in working with us. So thank you so much for this call. And I know it will feel a little bit like a trap because it was not agreed. But since you are on this call, I was thinking about exploiting your knowledge and experience and asking you, I mean, maybe we can start with Alberto now because you already started a little bit. If you have like two suggestions to give us as the Cyberpeace Institute, we are just celebrating the first year of existence in a very, I would say, hectic year. Let's put it in a diplomatic way. And but I mean, for the next year, hoping things will get better for all of us. Which are the two things that you think we should focus on in terms of like how we can really play our role in terms of achieving cyberpeace?
So we, for Foundation, engaged with the Institute, having in mind that the protection of civilian infrastructure is critical not only for governments, but for countries at large and for civil society at large, particularly for communities that are usually marginalized and affected by noxious digital policies. Now, in engaging with supporting the Institute, we realized that a significant part of the leadership associated with the Institute come primarily from Western countries. So I think that there are two challenges and piece of advice that I will give to the Institute in this regard. I think that the Institute have a big challenge in engaging with government officials, with institutional organizations, with global partners that do work beyond Western societies. I would love to see in the coming years people from India, China, Africa, or Latin America to join actively and to take leadership also in the work of the Institute. That's my first advice. Like, go beyond Western countries. Other case, you will be living in an echo chamber, and it may defeat the very purpose of trying to achieve global outcomes. And my second piece of advice and challenge for the Institute will be, as you mentioned, when I started to work for Foundation 6 years ago, I started talking about building capacities. 2 or 3 weeks down the road, I realized that it wasn't about building capacity, it wasn't about amplifying capacities. You will be amazed at the number of experts and the level of expertise that you can find in countries like Brazil, Mexico, India, Kenya, Nigeria, and surrounding. Try to connect with those local capacities. Try to identify what are their concerns, and based on their concern, amplify their voices, and make of their local concerns something that is relevant also at the international level. For many of those peers, they don't see that many chances for them to shape international policies, but they are eager to take at least the international policies, especially if they are positive, to reshape their local context. And that is an opportunity for you guys.
Thank you so much, Alberto. And as unfortunately, the video is streaming, I was taking notes, like, okay, I have my homework for the next year or so. Laura, if you want to add some other homeworks for us as a Cyberpeace Institute in, I mean, the two main things do you think we should focus from our position, but also engaging with the communities that you have both mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think the one I need to stress is like having women around the table. I think cyberspace, as many others, has been predominantly led by men. So I think having women as part of the conversation and decision making definitely will be one of my recommendations. And going a little bit one step further on what Alberto said, there is a lot of knowledge already there. So I think it's not reinventing the wheel. It's really maybe even start mapping who are the key people in the different countries and maybe bringing them and create a coalition or collaboration or really looking what's around there already and maybe work as a convener with different players instead of doing something that there might be someone already doing. So with lack of resources and lack of people, find what's already there, as Alberto said, because there's a lot of really good knowledge and practices, and really not reinvent the wheel. And I think also, if doing this mapping exercise, you may even find out where you think the work you do and the position that you have in this world, in this space, where you can make more difference and with whom you should be focusing the work with. So I think it's for me, it'll be mapping and finding the right entry points, but bringing the organizations from the Global South to be part of the conversation and having women around the table to help shape the conversation as well.
Thank you so much for mentioning it, and also I really like that you stress the aspect of not only in having women in the conversation but also in the decision making part, and again, let's say inclusive and participatory process and approach since the very beginning. So again, sort of like by default and by design. And also thanks for mentioning one important aspect in terms of like collaborating with the partners, which is amplifying and elevating. So we're really interested in knowing, let's say, the stories and for all the people that are interested in partnering with us, because definitely, as Alberto was saying, we're not 20 years old, we're just 1 year old, but we would like to serve basically the global common good that we are all after, which is Cyberpeace. We have like 5 minutes left, and I just want to ask one very quick question to both of you, because of your experience and your expertise in the field, which is, you mentioned at the very beginning some, let's say, self-critical approach in terms of philanthropy. So since I think there is also an interesting consideration now for the role that philanthropy can have in supporting Cyberpeace, and we heard before from Eli, cybersecurity, which is the trend that you see now and that you hope seeing, let's say, in terms of philanthropy linked to Cyberpeace, as I said, in like a year from now. 1 minute, Laura, it's your turn.
Francesca, really sorry, but you froze a little bit, so we missed part of what you said. I'm really sorry.
So basically, which is the main trend that you would see in linking, let's say, philanthropy to the achievement of Cyberpeace in the next year or so, coming from a pretty heavy, let's say, year?
Yeah, I think one of the many lessons we learned with the pandemic, if I talk about what's been happening with the civil society work, is the need for flexibility and to pivot, because sometimes we plan something and then things change, and the pandemic for me was a very good example of that. And sometimes what we need to provide as donors is core and flexible funding, so they can decide how they want to use. And I'm going to give an example, like with the COVID, we gave extra emergency funds to 6 organizations we support, and all of them working to respond to the increase of domestic violence. And in some of them, it was technology-related responses, like AI, kind of support for women who are suffering from domestic abuse. And what we needed, they needed the funds to be able to kind of develop and increase the access to the program, but also they needed funds to be able to pay for data for their staff work from home. So that's something that sometimes donor thinks, it's not really sexy, but only by being able to be flexible like that, we were enabling them to continue to do the work that at the end of the line will help to promote Cyberpeace and a safe space. So I think looking at it from a kind of a more flexible approach, and also looking at the different entry points. So it is, okay, in some countries, it's lack of access. In some countries that they have access to hardware, but data is really expensive. So how we address that? Or in some countries, they have access to the hardware, to data, but then there's a lot of abuse online. So there's so many, if you look at the user experience with digital space, there's so many entry points. So I think we need to be looking at all of that and in a very flexible way.
Alberto, you have one word. So choose it very well.
I see 4 trends for coming years. First, we will see an increase in the number of donors engaged in this space. Why? Because of the COVID-19 and because of the polarization and the impact that technology are having in democratic processes, has become evident that they need to engage. The challenge is that second, many of them may have a very transactional approach, and or challenge as for donors working in this space, but also a challenge for the institute is how do we help them to have a more systemic approach that is looking not into the everyday project, but in the long-term rules of the system. In terms of subject matters, and this is the third trend that I see, after the pandemic, it has become clear that the full connectivity was that we have achieved in many countries was a lie. And today, connectivity is no longer about video gaming. It's not about Netflix. It's about social inclusion and economic inclusion. And that subject matter is back to the table for the coming years. And the fourth trend that I see also at the programmatic level is the increasing trend of governments to adopt rules regarding to the digital experience with a national security and a public security approach. And that is really dangerous for civil society organizations, especially social justice or civil society organizations, because that approach tends to be very restrictive and punitive. That is also a role where the Institute can play a significant role in terms of framing the conversation in a way that it doesn't go in that direction. It doesn't go in a restrictive, punitive fashion, and instead it goes in a way that can enable human rights and can enable social justice.
Thank you so much, and really, thank you so much to you both, because you provided amazing inputs.